Rain hammered the marble steps of the Valenti estate like judgment itself, and Ronan Voss walked through it without flinching. He didn't rush. He never rushed. The driver held the umbrella, and Ronan waved him off, let the water soak into his suit jacket, let it run down the back of his neck. He wanted to feel it, wanted to be completely present for what was about to happen inside that house. The Caraway family had been avoiding this moment for 3 years. He had given them more time than anyone else ever received. He had watched their excuses pile up, like unpaid invoices, had listened to Vincent Caraway's promises dissolve in his mouth like wet paper. And now the night had finally arrived, and Ronan soon stood at their door in the rain, and there was nowhere left for any of them to run. His bodyguard Marcus knocked twice. The door opened before the second knock finished. Before we go any further, if stories like this one keep you up at night, if you find yourself leaning forward, wondering what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, there's a new story unfolding on this channel, and you don't want to miss a single one. Drop a like on this video, and leave a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now back to Serafina Caraway, and the night her life was sold at a dinner table. She had been standing at the top of the staircase for 11 minutes before he arrived. She knew it was 11 minutes because she had counted her breaths. She did that sometimes when her body was too tense. To think straight, she counted her breaths and told herself that whatever was happening, oxygen was still moving through her lungs, and that meant she was still alive, and that meant she could handle it. She had counted to roughly 340 when the front door opened and Ronan Voss walked into her family's home. Serafina Caraway was 29 years old, and she had spent the better part of the last decade understanding exactly what her family was. Not the version her mother presented at charity dinners. Not the version her father rehearsed for business partners over expensive wine. The real version, the one that existed in late-night phone calls she wasn't supposed to hear, and bank statements that didn't add up, and the specific way her father's voice went flat whenever someone mentioned the name Voss. She had understood for a long time that this night was coming. She just hadn't expected to feel this calm when it arrived. Ronan Voss was taller than she had imagined, broader. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than the Caraway's last functional car, and his hair was still damp from the rain. And he looked completely unbothered by the fact that he had just walked uninvited into another Air family's home at 9 in the evening. He looked like a man who had never been anywhere he wasn't supposed to be, because everywhere he went, he owned it. He didn't look up at the staircase. He handed his coat to no one in particular, and Marcus, the large quiet man behind him, took it without being asked. Then Ronan Voss looked up at the staircase, and his eyes found Serafina's immediately, like he had known exactly where she was standing. She didn't look away. She thought she might hate herself a little for noticing that his eyes were gray. Not the cold, colorless gray of bad weather. Something more complicated than that. Something that had once been a different color, and then had all the warmth burned out of it by something she didn't know yet. Her father appeared from the sitting room doorway. "Mr. Voss, you're early." "I'm exactly on time, Vincent." Ronan's voice was lower than she expected. Unhurried. "You're always hoping I'll be late." "I never am." Her father laughed the wrong kind of laugh. The kind that sounded like a small animal trying to pass as a confident one. Of course. Come in. We have dinner prepared." "I didn't come for dinner." The laugh died. Her father's hand found the doorframe and gripped it. We should sit down." "We should sit down then." Ronan was already moving toward the dining room. "I'll stand." Serafina came downstairs slowly, because rushing would have felt like a surrender to panic, and panic wasn't something she could afford tonight. She had put on a dark green dress, because it was the dress she felt most herself in. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, and she had pulled her hair back, because loose hair felt like vulnerability she couldn't manage right now. By the time she reached the dining room doorway, her father was already seated, his hands flat on the table, and her mother Eleanor sat rigidly beside him, with the expression she wore at funerals, composed, careful, pretending she understood what was happening when she absolutely did not. Ronan stood at the far end of the table. He had placed a folder directly in the center of it, and that folder sat there like a grenade no one wanted to touch. He looked at Serafina when she appeared in the doorway. "Sit down." her father said without looking at her. This doesn't concern you. Everything in this house concerns me, she said, and moved to the chair across from her mother and sat down. It always has. Her father's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He never argued with her when other people were watching, only when they were alone and he needed someone to absorb his failures. Ronan watched this exchange with an expression she couldn't read. Not amusement, not contempt. Something more careful than either of those things. 3 years ago, Ronan began, and the room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when something important has finally been said out loud. Your family borrowed $11 million from my organization. The terms were clear. The timeline was extended twice, which has never happened with any other account in the history of my operation. He paused. Vincent, what is currently in the Caraway operating accounts? Her father said nothing. Vincent, it's the markets have been. What is currently in the accounts? Her father's throat moved. 240,000. Ronan nodded once. You are short by $10,760,000. He opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. Stopped directly in front of her father. This is a contract. I want you to read it before I explain it, because I want to be certain later that you cannot claim you didn't understand. Her mother reached for the document. Her father got there first, pulled it toward himself, and Serafina watched his eyes move across the page. She watched the color drain from his face by degrees, slowly, like something being poured out of a vessel, until nothing was left. No, he said. Just that. The single word dropped into the room. Yes, Ronan said. You can't expect me to, this isn't. Her father's voice fractured. She's my daughter. And the entire room turned toward Serafina. She had already been reading it. She had leaned forward and tilted her head and read it upside down from across the table. And she was good at that. Had learned to do it in years of meetings she wasn't supposed to be in. She had understood it before her father finished his first pass. Ronan Voss wanted her hand in marriage. In exchange, the debt would be cleared. Entirely. Every dollar. The Caraways would keep their home, their remaining assets, the family name. Nothing else would be collected. No violence. No seizure of property. No further action against any member of the family. One condition. 1. Serafina. She sat back in her chair and looked at Ronan Voss across the table and said, You're buying a person. I'm offering a solution to a problem your family created, he said. That's the same thing dressed up. He looked at her for a moment. Most people in your position wouldn't push back on the wording. Most people in my position have spent their whole lives not pushing back on anything. She kept her voice level, kept her hand still in her lap, even though her heart was doing something uncomfortable and loud. And most people in my position also have families that didn't let it get to this point. So I'm not most people. Something moved across his face. Not admiration, closer to recognition. Like he had expected everyone in this room to behave a certain way, and she was the one variable that wasn't cooperating. Her father was still sputtering. This is criminal. This is you can't legally. I can, Ronan said simply. And the alternative is the full collection of the debt by methods that are considerably less comfortable than a marriage contract. He kept his eyes on Serafina. Your daughter already understands this. I would suggest you keep up. Later, she would think about that moment a lot. The way he said it, not dismissively, not cruelly, like he was just stating what was already obvious. She understood. She understood it the way she always understood things in this family, which was to say she understood it before anyone thought to tell her, and she understood it alone. And she was expected to absorb the weight of it without flinching because that was what Serafina Caraway did. She absorbed things. She processed them. She made decisions based on reality rather than what she wished reality was. Reality was this. Her father had borrowed money. He couldn't return from a man who could destroy what remained of their family with a single phone call. And now that man was standing in their dining room, offering an exit that should have been impossible. Question wasn't whether she'd say yes. She already knew she would say yes. Question was what it would cost her. She asked for one night. Not to sleep, she didn't sleep that night. Not really, but to sit in the quiet of her room with the contract in her hands and read every line of it 3 times. She was thorough by nature. She had grown up watching people, sign things without reading them, and spend years dealing with what they hadn't understood, and she refused to be that person. Contract was surprisingly specific. She would legally marry Ronan Voss within 30 days. She would reside in his primary home. She would attend events as required. She would conduct herself in a manner that did not bring public embarrassment to his name. In return, the debt was declared void, and no action would be taken against the Caraway family for any reason connected to the original agreement. There was nothing in the contract about love. There was nothing in the contract about love. There was nothing about fidelity, nothing about what their private life would look like. The document was ruthlessly transactional and completely silent on every question that actually mattered. She wrote her questions on a notepad. She had 14 of them. In the morning, she went downstairs and asked to speak with Ronan Voss directly. Her father tried to intercept her. He stood in the hallway with his reading glasses still on and his bathrobe belted wrong and said, "Serafina, I'll handle this. I'm your father. You borrowed $11 million from a mob boss," she said quietly. "I think you've handled enough." She walked past him. Marcus answered the door of the car where Ronan had apparently spent the night, or part of it, and, without any visible reaction to her appearance, at 7 in the morning, opened the rear door and gestured her in. Ronan was reading something. He didn't put it down immediately. He finished what he was reading, set the paper on the seat beside him, and turned to look at her. Up close, he was even harder to read. His face had the particular stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning not to react to things. There was a faint scar below his left ear, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were already looking closely. She was looking closely. "You have questions," he said. "Teen. Ask them." She asked everyone. He answered 11 of them directly, and 2 of them with enough information that she could infer the rest. And the last one, the one that mattered most, the one about why her specifically, why this particular demand, he looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you looked at me," he said. She waited. "Your father looked at the floor. Your mother looked at a spot on the wall. The household staff who passed the doorway all looked at anything except my face." He paused. "You looked directly at me. You read the contract from across the room upside down, and you still looked at me. That tells me something about the kind of person you are, that I'm not easily intimidated, that you see things for what they are." His voice didn't change. "That's rarer than you think." She studied him for a moment. "That's not enough reason to marry someone." "I agree. I didn't say it was the reason. I said it's why I chose you over anyone else in that room." He picked his paper back up. "The reason is something you'll understand later." She wanted to push. She almost did. But there was something in the way. He said it, not evasive. More like patient, like a man who knew exactly where the story was going and was willing to wait for her to arrive there on her own, that stopped her. "One condition of my own," she said. He looked at her again. "I want access to the original loan documents. All of them. Every record your organization has of the arrangement with my father." She kept her voice steady. "If I'm paying this debt with my life, I want to understand what I'm actually paying for." Something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion. Closer to something she'd call respect, except that seemed too easy, too fast. "Agreed," he said. She didn't let herself react to that. She got out of the car and walked back into the house and sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and did not let herself think about what she'd just agreed to, because thinking about it meant feeling it, and she needed to stay functional right now. She was very good at staying functional. It was one of the things she hated most about herself. The wedding was not what either of them performed for the outside world. Quiet, small, a civil ceremony in a building with bad fluorescent lighting, and a registrar who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, which Serafina found oddly comforting, because at least one of them was being honest about the situation. 2 of Ronan's men were present. Her sister Camille came, because Serafina had called her and told her to come, and Camille was the one member of the Caraway family who did what Serafina asked without demanding explanations. Her parents were not there. Her father had called the night before. He sounded smaller on the phone than he had at the dining table. Somehow, like the intervening days had pressed something out of him. He said he was sorry. He said it a few times in different configurations. He said that this wasn't how he'd intended things to go, that he'd been trying to protect the family, that Ronan had given him no choice. Serafina had listened to all of it without interrupting. "Dad," she said when he finally stopped. "Who told you to go to Ronan Voss?" Pause. Long enough to be meaningful. "It was the only option," he said. "That's not what I asked." "Serafina, who introduced you to him? Who arranged the initial meeting?" Another pause. "It doesn't matter now." "It does to me." He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and the specific quality of silence that followed unanswered questions, and she thought about the loan documents waiting for her in Ronan's files. Thought about the way her father had hung up, instead of saying a name, and she understood that she had not yet begun to find the bottom of this thing. The house Ronan lived in was not what she expected. She had expected something designed to intimidate, something that looked like money announcing itself. She had spent time around wealthy people her whole life, and there was a specific aesthetic that came with old money, insisting on its own importance, everything oversized, everything deliberate, everything saying, "Look at what I have." Ronan's house was large, but it wasn't theatrical. The rooms were well furnished without being staged. There were books on actual shelves that looked like they'd been read. There was a kitchen that showed evidence of actual cooking. The guest bedroom, he showed her to her room, he said, without any additional comment, had a window that faced a garden that someone clearly tended with care. She stood at that window for a long time after he left her to settle in. The garden was slightly overgrown at the edges, not neglected, cared for, but not controlled. She found she couldn't stop looking at it. A knock at her door, 2 hours after she arrived. She opened it and found a woman approximately her mother's age, with an efficient posture and a clipboard, and an expression that communicated she had seen extraordinary things and was not easily surprised by any of them. "I'm Dora," the woman said. "I run the house. I've prepared a schedule for your first week so you know what to expect in terms of events and appearances, but if anything needs adjusting, I want to know immediately. Mr. Voss mentioned you'd have questions." "I always have questions," Serafina said. "Good. People who don't ask questions are exhausting to manage." Dora handed her the clipboard. "Dinner is at 7. Mr. Voss eats at the table, and he prefers company, but if you need time, he won't make it an issue. He's reasonable about most things." Serafina looked at the schedule, then up at Dora. "Has there ever been anyone else in this house?" "A wife. A partner." Dora looked at her steadily. "No, it doesn't concern you? That he's never—" "I've worked for him for 9 years, Dora said. "I've watched him treat every person in this house with more basic dignity than most wealthy men show to their own family. Whatever he is outside these walls," she paused, precise about her words. "Inside these walls, he is decent. That's all I'll say about it." She left. Serafina stood in the doorway holding the clipboard and feeling something she couldn't name exactly, something that landed somewhere between unease and the very early, very unwelcome beginning of being wrong about something she'd already decided. Dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortable, quiet, just the quiet of two people who didn't know each other yet and were both too honest to fake familiarity. Ronan ate without looking at his phone, which she hadn't expected, and he asked her one question across the table. "Did you eat today?" She thought about it. "Coffee. Part of a sandwich." He nodded like this was information and not a judgment. "There's a lot of food." Dora overcooks when she's nervous about things. Is she nervous about me? She's nervous about the situation. You personally, I think she already likes. He reached for his water glass. She liked you before you arrived. I told her how you read the contract at the table. Serafina stared at him. You told your housekeeper about that. I tell Dora most things. She's been with me longer than anyone else who's still alive. He said it completely without drama. The way you say, "the sky is blue," and then seemed to register that it had landed strangely, because something briefly crossed his face that came out more concerning than I intended. "Only slightly," she said. He almost smiled. The almost was visible. He pulled it back before it fully formed, and she watched him do it, watched the muscle in his jaw move, and filed that away. Dinner continued. She ate more than she expected to. Food was good, which she also hadn't expected, and she hated that her expectations kept being wrong, because it made her feel unsteady in a way that was harder to manage than outright fear. Outright fear she knew how to navigate. Uncertainty was much worse. After dinner, she went upstairs and sat at the desk in her room and opened her laptop and began a document. She labeled it simply what I know, what I don't know, what I need to find out. It was a long time before she fell asleep. When she did, she dreamed about her father's voice on the phone. Pause before he hung up. The specific length of it. The way a man sounds when he knows you've asked exactly the right question, and he cannot afford to answer it. 3 days in, she asked Ronan for the loan documents. He didn't stall. He didn't redirect or add conditions. He had Marcus deliver 3 bankers' boxes to her room that afternoon, and each box was organized by date, and every document had a corresponding notation in a ledger that explained its context. She worked through them for 2 days straight, barely sleeping, eating at her desk, building a timeline on graph paper because she thought better in physical space than on a screen. By the end of the second day, she had found the first inconsistency. The original loan request had come not directly from her father, but through an intermediary. The intermediary's name appeared once in the documents, and then never again, listed as a referral contact in the first communication. It was a company name, not a person, a shell company. And the shell company's registration dated to nearly a decade before the loan, which meant it had been created with a long game in mind. She stared at this for a long time. Then she went downstairs and found Ronan in his office, which she hadn't entered before, and knocked on the open door. He was on a call. He raised one finger one moment and finished the call in under a minute and turned his full attention to her. She put the photocopy of the document on his desk and pointed to the company name. "Did you know about this?" she asked. He looked at the document. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did something that looked, just for a second, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't been allowed into yet. "Yes," he said, "and you didn't think to mention it. I was waiting to see if you'd find it." She pulled the chair across from his desk and sat in it without being invited to, and leaned forward with her elbows on her knees and looked at him directly. Ronan. It was the first time she'd used his first name without it being required by context. Neither of them pretended not to notice. "What is this company?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the evasive kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when someone is deciding how much of a truth to give at once. "It's connected to someone. Inside my organization," he said. "Someone who has been very careful for a very long time. Someone I have been watching without letting him know I was watching." He paused. "Your father's debt did not happen the way your father believes it happened." Stared at him. "What does that mean?" He picked up the document and looked at it with an expression she was starting to recognize, a kind of cold focus that wasn't anger, but was something on the same spectrum, something older and more controlled than anger. "It means your family and mine have both been played," he said. "And the person who played us has been standing still in this building for the last 7 years, pretending to be the most loyal man I've ever known." The room was very quiet. Outside, rain had started again, tapping at the office window, and Serafina sat across from the man she had married 4 days ago and felt the ground beneath her feet shift. In a way, she recognized the specific physical sensation of a story getting much larger and much darker than you'd thought it was. "Tell me everything," she said. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than the others. Then he told her. He told her about a man named Garrett Cole. He didn't start with the name. He started the way people start when they're telling you something they've never said out loud before. Slowly, from the outside edges, working toward the center, like a man approaching something still hot enough to burn. Garrett Cole had come to work for Ronan 11 years ago, after the collapse of a rival organization that Ronan had systematically dismantled over the course of 2 years. Cole was smart, meticulous, and had the rare quality of absolute discretion he never talked about the people he'd worked for before, which at the time Ronan had taken as professionalism. Later he would understand it differently. A man with nothing to say about his past is usually a man with too much to hide. Cole had risen fast, not through aggression, through competence. He managed logistics, managed communication, managed the financial architecture that kept Ronan's operation clean on paper and complicated for anyone trying to follow the money. He became, over 7 years, the person Ronan consulted before making any significant decision. His most trusted advisor, his operational right hand. Ronan told her this without any visible emotion, which she was starting to understand was not the same as feeling nothing. It was the opposite. It was what happened when a feeling was too large and too old to be worn on the face. When did you start suspecting him? She asked. 14 months ago. Ronan's hands were flat on the desk. Transaction. Small, the kind of thing designed not to be noticed. But I notice everything. He paused. I said nothing. Began watching. And the shell company, connected to my father's loan, Coles, has been from the beginning. He finally looked up from the document. He arranged the introduction. He designed the terms. He knew your father's business was already failing, and he structured the loan so that repayment would be impossible. His voice, it didn't rise. It got quieter, which was worse. Cole wanted two things. He wanted me to destroy the Caraway family to send a message to other clients who owed money, which would have created significant legal exposure for my organization. And he wanted access to financial information that your father's company had been holding information connected to the port contracts on the south side. Contracts worth considerably more than $11 million. Serafina felt the pieces assembling in her mind the way they always did when she got enough data, not dramatically, not with any kind of satisfaction. Just the cold mechanical click of things fitting into their correct positions. My father didn't collapse because of bad business, she said. He collapsed because someone made sure he would. And you came to collect a debt that was engineered. Yes. She sat back, let out a breath that she'd been holding without realizing it. And the marriage. Was that Cole's idea too? Something crossed Ronan's face. Hard and brief. No, that was mine. He held her gaze. I had already been watching Cole for months. I knew he had someone inside the Caraway organization feeding him information. I needed to get close to your family without Cole understanding why. A debt collection sends one man with a briefcase. A marriage brings me everything. Serafina was quiet for a long moment. So I'm a strategy. You were. He said it without softening it. That's not what you are now. She looked at him. It's been 4 days, Ronan. I know how long it's been. That's not enough time to be anything other than a strategy. He didn't argue with that. She respected him slightly more for it. She also felt something complicated and unwelcome shifting in her chest, which she categorically refused to examine right now. Who is Cole's contact inside my family's organization? She asked. Ronan's expression changed. Just slightly. That's what I don't have yet. She nodded slowly. Then we need to find out. He looked at her for a moment, and she couldn't tell what he was thinking, and she was usually very good at reading people. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. We, he said. Did I stutter? The next morning, Cole came for a scheduled briefing, and Serafina watched him from the upstairs hallway. She had positioned herself there deliberately, with coffee, leaning against the wall in a way that looked casual and was anything but. She wanted to see him before he saw her. She wanted to form her own impression, without any interference from what Ronan had told her. Garrett Cole was 53, medium height, with the kind of unremarkable face that was built for exactly this kind of work. Nothing about him signaled anything. He was the human equivalent of beige wallpaper. He moved through Ronan's front hallway with the comfortable ease of a man who had walked it 1,000 times, which he had. And he greeted Marcus with a nod that managed to be friendly without being warm. Then he looked up and saw her. His expression shifted for exactly half a second. She almost missed it. The adjustment was practiced and fast, a small recalibration. The look of a man filing information away at high speed, and then he smiled, pleasant and measured, and said, "You must be Mrs. Voss." "Serafina," she said. "Serafina." He repeated her name like he was tasting it. "I've heard a great deal about you." "From whom?" A small pause. Not long enough to mean anything to most people. Long enough to mean something to her. "From Ronan, of course. He speaks highly of your intelligence." "He barely knows me. He's a fast judge of character." Cole's smile held. "We both are." She held his gaze and smiled back and said nothing else. And he moved on toward Ronan's office. And she stayed at the railing until his footsteps disappeared. And then she set her coffee down very carefully on the hallway shelf and breathed through her nose for 3 seconds. He was good. She would give him that. The half-second recalibration, the pleasant warmth that reached nowhere near his eyes. He was very, very good. But she had grown up inside a family of people performing versions of themselves, and she knew the specific quality of a face arranged on purpose. She went back to her room and added 3 lines to her document. 2 days later, Ronan came to her room at 11 at night. He knocked. That still surprised her each time, the way he always knocked, always waited. She opened the door, and he was in a different suit than the morning. No tie, and he looked like he'd been in meetings for the past 8 hours, which he had been. And there was something tight around his eyes that hadn't been visible before. "Cole asked about you today," he said. She stepped back and let him in. He stood in the center of the room because there was no chair positioned at a convenient distance from the door, and she didn't offer him a seat, and he didn't take one. "What did he ask?" "Whether you had access to the business files. Whether you'd expressed interest in the financial operations." Ronan's voice was controlled and even. But she was learning the textures of his control, learning that even-voiced was not the same as calm. He framed it as concern. Said, "He wanted to make sure I wasn't exposing sensitive information to someone I didn't fully know yet." "How did you respond?" "I told him you weren't interested in business matters, that you spent most of your time in the garden." He paused. He seemed relieved. "Good." She went to the desk and turned her Grafper timeline face down. Old habit, she didn't know if Cole had access to this room, didn't know the reach of his information network, and she wasn't taking chances. He's accelerating. If he's checking on me now, he's feeling pressure from somewhere, from me. Ronan moved toward the window, stood looking at the garden below, the same garden she'd been looking at since she arrived. "I've been quietly reallocating access to 3 financial accounts that Cole manages. Small amounts, changes he'll notice, but that he can't openly question without revealing that he was tracking those accounts in ways he shouldn't have been." She looked at him. "You're making him nervous." "I'm making him move." He turned from the window. Nervous men stay still. Men who are about to do something get active. He looked at her directly. "I need you to understand that when he moves, it could be toward you. You're the unknown variable in his calculation. Unknown variables make men like Cole dangerous. I've dealt with dangerous men before. Not like him." "I married you," she said, and there was no real heat in it, just the plain fact, and something shifted in his face that she was becoming very familiar with the pull toward something, and then the decision not to let it arrive. "That's not the same," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not worried about Cole." "You should be appropriately worried about Cole." "Appropriately," she repeated. "Not excessively." He almost did the almost smile thing again. She'd started counting those. "Appropriately," he confirmed. After he left, she sat at her desk for a long time, not writing anything, just thinking. Thinking about the shell company and the engineered debt and the man downstairs with the beige wallpaper face who had been quietly building something for years while standing inside Ronan's operation. Thinking about her father, who had been maneuvered into a trap and hadn't had the intelligence to see it coming, or hadn't had the courage to say so when she asked directly. Thinking about what Ronan had said, that the marriage was his idea, that she was a strategy, that she wasn't that anymore. She didn't let herself decide what to do with that information. Not yet. She just let it sit in the room with her and tried to get a few hours of sleep. Her sister Camille called on a Thursday. Camille was 3 years younger and had the one quality no other member of the Caraway family possessed, which was that she said exactly what she thought, at exactly the moment she thought it, without calculation, without managing for reaction. It was a quality that had caused her tremendous social difficulty growing up, and that Serafina had always privately considered the most honest thing in the family. "Horrible?" Camille asked. No greeting. That was also Camille. "No." "Is he cold?" Serafina thought about it. "Sometimes." "Are you okay?" It wasn't a question exactly. It was the word okay deployed as a carrier for a much larger and more complicated inquiry, and Serafina understood it perfectly because they had been having versions of this conversation their whole lives. "I think so," she said. "I found something in the loan documents." "Something bad?" "Something that means Dad didn't just make bad business decisions." She kept her voice low out of habit, even though she was alone in her room. "Camille, do you remember anyone coming to the house?" Anyone knew, around the time everything started falling apart. 8, 9 years ago. Camille was quiet for a moment. There was that consultant, the one Dad brought in when he started talking about expanding the port contracts. Serafina's grip on the phone tightened. Do you remember his name? God, he had one of those faces. You know, forgettable, very pleasant. I remember thinking he was like talking to a cup of warm water. Nothing really there. Camille paused. Cole, I think. Something Cole. The room went very still. Camille. Serafina kept her voice completely even. I need you to think carefully. Did this man ever go through Dad's office? Did he have access to the port contract files? Sarah. Did he? A long pause. Yes, Camille said slowly. Yes, he did. I came in once and found him at the filing cabinet, and he said Dad had asked him to pull some documents. And I didn't think anything about it, because Dad was always asking people to pull documents. How long was he in that office alone? 20 minutes? Maybe more. I left after a few minutes, because he made me uncomfortable, even though I couldn't say why. Camille's voice had changed, gotten tighter. Serafina, you're scaring me. I'm not trying to. I just need you to remember everything you can about him. She paused. And Camille, don't tell Dad we had this conversation. Why not? Because I don't know yet whose side Dad is on, she thought. Because I don't know if he's a victim or a participant or something complicated in between. And until I do, I can't afford to have information moving through him. Because I'm still figuring something out, she said. Just trust me for a little while longer. Camille trusted her. She always had. It was another thing Serafina carried that she didn't talk about. She went to Ronan that afternoon with two things, what Camille had told her, and a question she'd been building for 3 days. He listened to the Camille information without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and she watched something move behind his eyes, not surprise. Because she was increasingly convinced that very little surprised him, but confirmation of something he'd suspected and had hoped was wrong. Cole accessed your father's port contract files 9 years ago, she said. That's 2 years before my father took out the loan. He wasn't reacting to the debt. He created the conditions for the debt. This was a decade-long operation. Yes, he had a reason that predates all of this. Something personal. She watched his face. Tell me about 7 years before you hired him. Tell me what happened to your organization. Ronan stood up from his desk. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, for long enough that she wondered if he was going to answer. I lost 3 people, he said. My closest operational team. Men I trusted completely. There was an intelligence leak. Someone passed information to a federal task force, and those 3 men were arrested in a single night. 2 of them died in custody under circumstances that were never properly investigated. He stopped, breathed once, deliberate and measured. I spent 4 years finding out who passed that information. She waited. He turned around. His face was the most unguarded she'd seen it. The trail led to a consultant who had worked briefly with my operation. A man who moved quickly between organizations and left nothing behind. Couldn't get a name. I couldn't get a face. The trail went cold. The silence that followed had weight to it. Cole came to you 1 year after that, she said slowly. Yes. New name. New face, new history. She felt something cold settling in her stomach. He didn't just engineer my father's debt. He came back into your organization to finish something he started 11 years ago. He's been inside your operation for 7 years not to steal from it. She stopped, made herself say it. He's been inside to destroy it. All of it. Everything you rebuilt after those 3 men died. Ronan looked at her across the room, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically, the kind of tired that lives deeper than the body, the kind that comes from carrying a thing for too long, and finally having someone else say it out loud. You got there faster than I did, he said quietly. I had fresh eyes. Yes. He moved back toward the desk. There's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. She braced, though she kept it from showing. The 3 men who were arrested, 2 who died in custody. He picked up a pen from his desk and set it down again. A small, unnecessary movement that told her more than anything else had. One of them was my brother. The room absorbed this. She didn't fill the silence with anything. She let it be what it was. I'm sorry, she said. It was inadequate, and she knew it. But inadequate and true was better than precise and hollow. Cole knows I know, Ronan said. Not the full extent he doesn't know how much I've pieced together. But he knows I've been moving against him financially, and he's going to interpret that correctly. He finally looked at her directly. I need to know who his contact is inside your family. Someone has been feeding him information about you since the marriage, about your habits, your questions, what rooms you spend time in. Someone who knows you. Something cold went through her. She thought about her father's phone call, the pause before he hung up. She thought about the name he hadn't said. She thought about a filing cabinet accessed for 20 minutes 9 years ago. It's not Camille, she said. She was certain of that. And she needed to say it first. I know. Is it my father? Ronan's expression told her everything before his mouth did. She absorbed it. She made herself absorb it the way she had learned, to absorb things, not denying it, not rushing past it, just letting it be real and sitting with the realness of it until she could breathe around it. He's not just a victim, she said. It wasn't a question. No. He knows what Cole did to your people. He's known for years. Stood up. She stood up because she needed to be in a different physical position than the one she'd been in when the world was still shaped the previous way. She walked to the window, looked out at the garden, the slightly overgrown edges, the evidence of care without control. He let you come to collect a debt he knew was engineered, she said. He let you walk in and put a contract on the table. He let me. She stopped. He calculated that I would destroy the family. Quickly, publicly. Cole needed that to happen to create the legal exposure that would give federal authorities grounds to dismantle my operation. Ronan's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that she felt more than heard. Your father was supposed to be the mechanism that destroyed me. When I made the marriage offer instead, it disrupted everything. She turned around. He hung up the phone when I asked him who introduced him to you. Yes. He's been passing Cole information about me since I arrived here. Yes. She held Ronan's gaze across the room. She felt the thing inside her chest, the thing she'd been refusing to examine. For days, finally become something she couldn't avoid naming. My father sold me to his handler, she said. Ronan said nothing. He didn't look away. He knew what this would be. He knew what kind of world he was sending me into. And he did it anyway, because Cole needed him to. Her voice didn't break. She was genuinely surprised by that, but it didn't break. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't a man out of options, trying to protect his family. Stopped. He offered me up, she said, deliberately, as a piece of Cole's plan. Ronan crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the scar below his ear, close enough to see the specific color of those gray eyes. And he said, I didn't know the full extent of his involvement when I made the offer. I believed your father was a victim being used. I would not have. He stopped himself, started again. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that I didn't knowingly put you in a position where your own father. I know, she said. You can't know, I'm telling you. Ronan. She said it the same way she had that first morning in his office. And he stopped. I believe you. I know the difference between a man who made a calculated decision and a man who got it wrong. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. He was very still. And I've been watching my father my whole life, she said. I know what he is. I just didn't know how far it went. She breathed. Once, twice, I need an hour. He stepped back, gave her room. Take what you need. She turned back to the window and heard him move toward the door. And then she said without turning around, Ronan, Cole thinks I'm a liability to you. He's going to make a move using me as leverage. She paused. Don't keep me outside of your planning. I'm more useful to you if you let me in all the way. A long moment. All right, he said. The door closed. She stood at the window and looked at the garden and breathed and let herself feel the full weight of what she now knew that her father had handed her to the enemy's operation, like an expendable piece on a board. Had looked her in the eye for 29 years, and she had never seen it coming. Had trusted him in the way daughters trust fathers even when those fathers give them no real reason to, and now the trust was gone, and what remained was something much colder and much clearer. She was not going to protect him. She was going to end this. And when Marcus knocked on her door 40 minutes later, with a phone in his hand and her father's name on the screen, she looked at it for exactly 3 seconds before picking up and saying, calm as winter water, "Hello, Dad. Think it's time we talked honestly, don't you?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough to mean something. Then her father said, "Serafina, and something in his voice told her he had just understood that the game had changed, and that the daughter he had always underestimated was no longer standing anywhere near where he'd left her. Her father didn't speak for 11 seconds. She counted them. Old habit back again. The things she did when her body needed to stay still while her mind was moving fast. 1, 2, 3. The silence on the phone had a texture to it. Not the silence of someone thinking about what to say, but the silence of someone calculating what they could still afford to admit. 4, 5, 6, Serafina. His voice came back measured. Too measured. The voice he used in board meetings, not the voice of a father. I think you may have gotten some information that's been interpreted incorrectly. Stop, she said. He stopped. I know about Cole, she said. I know about the shell company. I know about the port contract files he accessed in your office 9 years ago. I know you've been in contact with him since I moved into this house. She kept her voice flat, not cold flat. Cold implied emotion being suppressed. What she felt right now was something past emotion, something that had burned clean through to the other side and come out as pure clarity. I know you knew what the debt was, what it was designed to do. The silence this time was different, shorter. The silence of a man whose exits have just been blocked. Who told you? It doesn't matter who told me. Serafina, you have to understand. This is complicated. There are things you don't. Did you know? She said, and she heard her own voice drop to something very quiet, the specific quiet that meant she was controlling herself at maximum capacity, that Cole was responsible for the death of Ronan's brother. Nothing. Not a pause. Nothing. The complete absence of reaction from a man who should have reacted. You knew, she said. It's not. He started and stopped. There were circumstances. Ronan's organization was dangerous. They posed a risk to legitimate. His brother died in custody. 2 of Ronan's men died. You knew, and you kept working with Cole, and then you handed me to this situation like I was a bargaining chip you could afford to lose. Her voice didn't rise. It stayed flat and quiet, and she felt the thing inside her chest go very still, the way a wound goes still, after the initial shock, the specific stillness that means something permanent has happened. Tell me one true thing, Dad, just one. Can you do that? A long pause. I was already in too deep, he said. By the time I understood what Cole was fully planning, I was implicated. If I had gone to anyone, you could have gone to me. Silence. You could have told me the truth at any point in the last 9 years. You could have told me before you took that loan, before Ronan came to the house, before you signed a contract that handed your daughter to a man whose brother died because of your choices. She breathed once, slow and deliberate. You chose not to every time. So don't tell me you were in too deep. You swam there on purpose. Serafina, Cole is going to move soon, she said, against Ronan, and you're going to help me stop it. The silence that came back was not the silence of a guilty man deciding whether to confess. It was something else, something that made the hairs on her arm move. Can't do that, her father said. You can, no. His voice changed. Something came into it she hadn't heard before, not regret, not calculation, but something flat and final that sounded almost like relief, like a man who had spent a long time pretending and had just decided to stop. You don't understand what Cole is, what he's capable of. I have protected this family the only way I knew how, and I will not. You put me inside his plan as a piece, she said. That is not protection. You were never supposed to be hurt. Ronan was supposed to. Don't. The flatness cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for him to hear it. Don't tell me what was supposed to happen to me. Don't dress this up. Her father went quiet again. Then softly, he said, He has your mother. The room rearranged itself. Not physically, but something in the quality of the air changed, the way air changes in a room. When a window breaks, the sudden presence of something that was outside, now being inside, something that had no business being there. What did you say? She said. Cole. Her father's voice was barely above a whisper now, and she heard something in it. She had never heard before, not in all the years, of watching him manage difficulty with performance and deflection. She heard something that was actual fear, raw and unmedicated and real. He took her 2 days ago, after the marriage. When I tried to, I told him I wanted out. Told him I was done, he said. A breath. Ragged. He said she was insurance. That as long as I cooperated, she would be fine. That the moment I stopped cooperating, or the moment Ronan made a significant move against him, he would. "Where is she?" Serafina said. She was already moving toward the door. "I don't know. He doesn't tell me. He calls me. I have a number, but it changes." Her father's voice was fracturing now, the composure finally giving out underneath something too heavy to hold up. "Serafina, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't reach what I've done. I know there's no version of sorry that." "The number," she said. "Give me the last number he called from." He gave it. She memorized it the way she memorized everything, immediately and completely. "Don't call him," she said. "Don't tell him anything. Don't move." She paused with her hand on the door. "And don't mistake this for forgiveness. I'm doing this for her, not for you." She opened the door and Ronan was standing in the hallway. She didn't know how long he'd been there. His face told her nothing. His eyes told her that he had heard enough. "Cole has my mother," she said. His jaw tightened. "One small movement since when?" 2 days ago. My father tried to pull out, and Cole took her as leverage. She pushed past him into the hall, and he turned with her, fell into step without being asked. "I have a phone number. It's probably disposable, but your people can trace a disposable if the call was recent enough." "Marcus," Ronan said. Marcus appeared from the stairwell, landing like he materialized out of the wall, which Serafina had stopped finding startling around day 5. Ronan said the number she gave him without asking her to repeat it. He had been listening, had memorized it too. "I need a trace and a location. I need it fast." Marcus was already on his phone before the sentence finished. Ronan caught her arm, not hard, just a hand on her elbow that stopped her momentum. "Serafina, look at me." She looked at him. Her chest was doing something she didn't like, and her hands wanted to shake, but she wasn't letting them, and she was counting breaths again. 340, 341. "Cole did this because he knows we're close," Ronan said. His voice was low and very direct. "This is not a defensive move. This is someone preparing to end the game. I know. He's not going to keep her as leverage. He's going to use her as bait. He wants us to move fast and stupid toward wherever she is. I know that too, and we're still going to move toward her." "Yes," she said. "We are, but not fast and stupid." She pulled her arm back gently, not angrily. "He doesn't know what I know about him. He thinks I'm a civilian wife, asking inconvenient questions. He doesn't know I've built a timeline. He doesn't know I know about your brother." She looked at him steadily. "Let me talk to him first." Ronan looked at her for a long moment. His hand dropped from her elbow. "That's the most dangerous thing you've said to me. Probably. He will understand immediately that you know more than you should. He'll accelerate, which gives us the window before he has time to reorganize." She held his gaze. "He thinks the pieces are still in his positions. The moment he understands they're not, he'll panic and move. We need to be where he's moving to before he gets us there." Ronan was quiet. She couldn't seem processing it, not doubting her. But running scenarios, the way she imagined he always ran scenarios, quickly and sequentially, and with the specific focus of a man who had survived this long, by thinking 3 steps ahead. "All right," he said. They went to work. The trace came back in 40 minutes. The number had been used to access a cell tower on the south side, near the port district. Port district. The port contracts. The same thread running through everything like an artery. Marcus laid a map on the dining table and Ronan stood over it, and Serafina stood beside him, and 2 men she'd been introduced to as Santos and Webb filled in the rest of the space, and nobody in the room was pretending this was anything other than what it was. "Cole owns 3 properties through layered holding companies in this area," Ronan said, tracing a finger along the waterfront. "This one is nominally a logistics office. It's been listed as inactive for 18 months. He tapped the spot. "That's where she is." "You know this or you think this?" Santos said. "I know this. Cole has used that building before. It's clean on paper, access controlled, positioned for exit through the port if he needs to move quickly." Ronan straightened. "He's been planning for the possibility that I'd find him out. This is his contingency." Serafina studied the map. The logistics office sat at the end of a commercial block, backing up against a dock access road. 1 primary entrance, 1 service entrance at the rear. She noted the distances, the adjacent structures, the sight lines. "He'll have people inside," she said. "Not many. Cole is methodical. He won't want a large footprint at a location like this." 4, maybe 5 agreed, Ronan said. and he'll be monitoring my father's phone. She looked up from the map. He'll know within the hour that the call happened. He may already know. Ronan met her eyes, which changes the timeline, which eliminates the timeline. She breathed once. We go tonight. Webb made a sound that wasn't quite objection and wasn't quite agreement. Santos said nothing. Ronan looked at her with the expression she'd seen that first morning in his car, the careful, cataloging look, measuring something she couldn't fully name. Tonight, he said. Not a question. Tonight, she confirmed. He nodded once, and the room moved. Called Cole at 7 p.m., Ronan's people had established that the disposable number was still active. She sat in Ronan's office with her phone on the desk in front of her, and Ronan standing just outside the frame of the single narrow window present but not visible, positioned where he could hear everything. She dialed. Cole picked up on the second ring. Serafina. Her name in his mouth, the same way he'd said it in the hallway that first morning, tasting it. This is unexpected, is it, she said. I thought you'd been expecting to hear from me eventually. Beat. Precise. Controlled. Your father called you. My father told me you have my mother. She kept her voice even, calm in the way they communicated information without emotion. I'm calling to discuss terms. Terms. He said the word with something that might have been amusement in another register, but came out as something colder. What terms do you imagine you're in a position to offer? I know about the shell company. I know about the port contract files you accessed 9 years ago. I know about the 3 men in Ronan's organization, the arrests, the custody deaths. I know about his brother. She paused, heard nothing on the other end. I know that you've been inside Ronan's operation, for 7 years running a long game designed to expose him to federal prosecution. And I know the port contracts are the linchpin. Without them, you don't have enough to move against him legally. Silence. Long enough to mean she'd landed every single thing accurately. You've been busy, Cole said. His voice was different now. Still controlled, but the pleasantness had evaporated entirely, and what was underneath was something much harder and much colder. Ronan's been talking. Ronan gave me the documents. I did the reading myself. She kept her hands flat on the desk, refused to let them grip anything. Here's the term. Release my mother. Tonight. In return, I don't take what I've assembled to the contacts I've identified at the federal level contacts. I should tell you, who are not the ones you've already cultivated. Another pause. You don't have federal contacts. I have a law degree I never finished, and enough connections from my family's business years to make 3 introductory calls this evening. She had already identified them, already drafted the emails, unsent, sitting in her drafts folder. I'm not a naive woman who wandered into your game, Mr. Cole. You underestimated what I am. That's a mistake you're going to want to correct before it gets worse. Cole was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to make her aware of her own heartbeat. Port contract files your father held, he said slowly. Did Ronan tell you what they contained? Enough. Did he tell you that his organization's ownership of 3 port-adjacent properties appears on page 47 of the primary file? That the documentation linking Voss family assets to those properties predates the legitimized holding structure by 6 years? His voice had gone almost conversational, the way a man sounds when he knows he's about to detonate something. Did Ronan explain to you that the evidence I've compiled doesn't just expose him to federal scrutiny, it's already been filed 3 weeks ago by a cooperating source inside his own organization? The room went cold. She kept her face still, kept her voice still. Cooperating source. Someone who has been with him much longer than I have. Cole paused. Someone whose testimony, combined with my documentation, means that regardless of what happens to me in the next 24 hours, Ronan Voss will be facing federal charges by the end of the week. Another pause. The game isn't what you thought it was, Serafina. You've been studying the board, but you've been looking at the wrong pieces. She held the phone and felt something cold moving through her that had nothing to do with temperature. Who? She said. But she already knew. She already knew because she had been building a timeline for 2 weeks, and the timeline had a gap she hadn't been able to fill, and the gap was shaped exactly like the answer she was about to hear. Dora, Cole said. 9 years with Ronan. Impeccable loyalty. Absolute access. A pause, my aunt. The phone felt very heavy in her hand. Release my mother, she said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. Your mother is perfectly safe and will remain so as long as Ronan makes no moves against me in the next 48 hours. After the charges process and his organization begins to dismantle, your family's involvement in all of this gets buried with everything else. Clean exit for everyone. Cole's voice was almost gentle. Tell him to stand down, Serafina. It's the only version of this where everyone you care about walks away. Call ended. She sat without moving. Outside the window, she could hear Ronan's footsteps before the door opened. Came in and looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Immediately, not panic. He was not a man who panicked, but a readiness. A bracing. The look of someone who has learned to read disaster in other people's faces before it is spoken. Tell me, he said. The federal filing is already done. She looked at him directly, because he deserved that, deserved to hear it from her face and not from the floor. Someone inside your organization cooperated. The documentation is submitted. Charges are coming by the end of the week, regardless of what we do to Cole. She watched him absorb it, watched him not move, not react, not give anything to the room. Dora, he said. Not a question. He got there the same way she did and faster, because he'd known Dora for 9 years. Because he'd known Dora for 9 years and somewhere, very deep and very kept the knowledge at Crawley's, that the people closest to you were the ones who could destroy you most completely. Yes, she said. His jaw tightened. One breath in, one breath out. His hands went into his pocket. She'd seen him do that before. Once. He was controlling something that wanted to be uncontrolled. He stopped. Started again. I need you to understand that I did not know. About Dora. About any cooperation, I know, she said. Serafina, she stood up. I know. I believe you. We don't have time for this. Right now. She came around the desk and stood directly in front of him, close enough that she had to look up slightly, and she held his gaze. The federal filing is done, but it hasn't processed yet. 3 weeks since submission means it's still moving through preliminary review. There's a window. She watched his eyes sharpen. If we get the evidence, the original evidence, Cole's compiled documentation, and we can demonstrate it was gathered through a compromised witness and a fabricated chain, the filing falls apart. He looked at her. That evidence is at the logistics building.
Yes.
Where Cole is also holding your mother.
Yes.
They stood in the small space of the office, with everything that had just happened filling the room around them, and she could see him running at the variables. The timing, the exposure, the odds, and she watched his face cycle through something and come out the other side into the particular stillness that meant a decision had been made. We go tonight, he said. Yes, and Dora. She'll call Cole the moment she realizes you know. You need Marcus to handle her before she can make contact. She paused. I'm sorry. He said nothing for a moment. 9 years. She knew what 9 years of trust felt like. When it collapsed, she'd spent her whole life watching her father. And she still hadn't been ready for it. She didn't say any of that because it wasn't the moment for it. She just stood there and let him have the moment. Marcus, he said finally, into the air, and Marcus was at the door within seconds. Ronan gave him the instruction, quietly. 3 sentences. Marcus nodded and was gone. Ronan looked back at Serafina. Something in his face was different now, not broken. Not undone, but stripped of something. The last layer of professional distance between the man and the situation and what was underneath was exactly what she'd started to suspect was there. Someone who had spent years building everything from wreckage and had just found the wreckage starting again. If we get in that building, he said, and Cole gets hold of you. He won't, if he don't. She picked up her phone and her notepad and faced him squarely. I've been the unprotected person in every room I've ever been in, Ronan. I've been managing my father's disasters since I was 17. I've been the one who shows up and cleans it up and keeps breathing when everything else is on fire. She paused. I'm very good at it. Let me do it. He looked at her for a long moment. His hand moved. She saw it started to reach toward her, then stopped, returned to his side. The almost gesture, like the almost smile. These small contained movements of a man who had learned to keep himself from reaching for things. Stay behind Santos until we're inside, he said. Agreed. And if Cole tries to use you as leverage in that building, then we'll have the answer to whether he's smarter than I think he is, she said. She walked past him toward the door, and his hand caught her wrist, brief and light, not restraining, more like a comma in a sentence. A pause before something important. Stopped. Looked back, he let go. Come back out of that building, he said. Quiet. The quietest thing he'd said to her yet. Something in her chest moved that she was completely unprepared for, and she stood in the doorway of his office at 9:15 on a Thursday night, with everything about to go very wrong before it could go right. And she said, I intend to, and she meant it. She walked out into the hall, where Marcus had already vanished, and Santos and Webb were already moving, and the car was already being brought around, and there was no version of the next few hours that wasn't going to cost something. She had stopped being the woman who cleaned up other people's disasters. She was about to walk into the eye of this one herself, by choice, with her eyes completely open, and the woman she had been, 2 weeks ago, the careful, contained woman who absorbed things quietly and stayed functional, and never let herself reach for anything. That woman was not the one walking toward the front door. She didn't know exactly who the new one was yet. She was about to find out. Car moved through the Port District without headlights for the last 3 blocks. Serafina sat in the rear seat between Santos and the door, watching the waterfront slide past the window in the dark. The logistics building came into view at the end of the commercial block. 3 stories, corrugated metal cladding, a single light source visible on the 2nd floor, behind frosted glass. Everything else dark. Everything else deliberately, carefully dark. Ronan was in the front seat. He hadn't spoken since they left the house. She'd watched him in the rearview mirror the entire drive, watched the set of his shoulders, the way his hands rested on his knees flat. Still, the practiced stillness of a man preparing for something his body already knew how to do. Webb pulled the car into the shadow of an adjacent warehouse and killed the engine. 4 confirmed inside, Marcus said from the passenger seat. He had joined them at the last corner, materialized from somewhere she hadn't tracked. 2 at the primary entrance, 1 near the rear service door, 1 on the 2nd floor with her. He paused. Cole is not inside. Serafina registered that. He's not there. No vehicle. No thermal signature matching his profile. Marcus glanced at Ronan. He may be monitoring remotely. Or he already moved, Ronan said. He told me 48 hours, Serafina said. He believes we'd negotiate. He wouldn't expect us to move tonight. She thought about it quickly, turning it over. He's not there because he doesn't think he needs to be. He thinks we're still deciding. Which means the 4 inside don't know we're coming, Santos said. They know something could come. They just don't know when. Ronan turned in his seat and looked at her directly. You stay with Marcus until we're on the 2nd floor. Don't argue with me about this. She didn't argue. Not because she agreed with the instinct to protect her, but because, tactically, he was right and she was clear-eyed enough to know it. The documents, she said. If Cole isn't inside, the compiled evidence may not be there. It's there, Ronan said. Cole doesn't carry physical documentation. Keeps it staged, accessible, but not on his person. The building is his contingency location. Everything he'd need to move quickly is in there. He held her gaze. I know how he operates. 7 years. She nodded. Webb opened his door. The night air came in cold and salt-smelling. The dock somewhere close, the sound of water against pilings audible, if you went quiet enough to hear it. Quiet. They moved. The man at the rear service door went down before he heard them coming. Santos, moving with a speed that Serafina filed away, into the part of her brain that was cataloging everything, to put it, that wasn't terror. She wasn't terrified. She needed to be honest about that she was afraid, the real and grounded kind of afraid that made her vision sharper and her breath controlled and her body very awake. But it wasn't terror. It wasn't the paralytic kind. It was the fear that made you functional rather than the kind that made you freeze. She'd met both kinds before. This was the useful one. Ronan went through the service door first, Marcus directly behind him. Santos gestured her forward, and she went through a short corridor that smelled of rust and cold concrete and something chemical she didn't want to identify, into a large open warehouse floor that was mostly dark and mostly empty and mostly wrong, because the second light source she'd seen from outside the 2nd floor was moving. They know, she said quietly. Ronan had already seen it. He moved left toward a metal staircase along the far wall. fast but not running. She matched his pace without being told to. The man at the base of the staircase came round the corner at the same moment they reached it. For half a second, everyone stopped. Then everything happened at once. Santos moved. There was a sound she felt more than heard, and the man went down and kept moving, and she kept her eyes forward and breathed. Second floor. The light was stationary again, behind a door at the end of a short corridor. Ronan stopped. 3 steps from the door. He held up one hand. Stopped. Heard it a half second after him. Voices. 2. One of them, her mother's, muffled, controlled but audible, the specific cadence of someone trying to sound calmer than they are. Something Serafina recognized because she'd learned it from watching Eleanor Caraway navigate 30 years of her father's instability. The other voice was a man's, low, giving instructions. 1 hand inside the room, not 3. The third had been at the rear door. Ronan looked back at her, made a small gesture she understood. Stay. Not because you're unimportant, but because you're the variable I can't afford to lose right now. She nodded. He went through the door. It was 11 seconds. She counted them because she had to do something with her hands and her mind. And 11 was the number she reached before she heard the specific sounds of the situation resolving. And then Ronan's voice saying her name. She went through the door. Her mother was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the room, wrists in front of her. One lamp on the floor beside her throwing strange upward shadows across everything. Eleanor Caraway was 61 years old and had spent her life managing appearances. And even now, even here, there was something maintained about the way she sat back straight. Chin level that made Serafina's chest do something painful and complicated. Crossed the room and knelt in front of her mother and looked at her face. Are you hurt? No. Eleanor's voice was steady. Her eyes were not. Serafina. She said her daughter's name like it was the first real word she'd been allowed to say in 2 days. You shouldn't have... Don't. She was already working at the zip ties, Santos handing her a blade handle first. Don't tell me I shouldn't have. I'm just saying. Mom. She cut the ties and her mother's hands came free, and Eleanor grabbed her wrist and held it with a grip that said everything her composed face wouldn't. I know. We need to move. There was a second man. On the phone, he's not here, Serafina said. That's a different problem. She got her mother upright and turned to find Ronan already scanning the room. He'd found something, a filing case, metal, with a combination lock positioned beneath a workbench along the far wall. He was looking at it with the expression of a man who has found the thing he came for and is already calculating what it costs. That's it, she said. Yes. He crouched, examined the lock, looked up at Marcus, who was in the doorway. 3 minutes. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Can you open it without the combination? Serafina asked. Marcus can open anything that has a lock. Ronan stood. Looked at her mother, then at Serafina. She needs to go now. Santos. I'm not leaving without Mom. Serafina turned to Eleanor. Go with Santos. He'll take you to the car and you'll wait. Be right behind you. She held her mother's gaze. Promise. Eleanor looked at her daughter for a moment. The specific look of a woman reassessing what her child has become. The recalibration that happens when you realize the person you spent years protecting has developed past the point where they need it. All right, Eleanor said. Santos took her arm. They went. The room was quieter, with 3 people in it instead of 5. Ronan moved back to the filing case. Serafina stood in the center of the room and looked at the lamp on the floor and listened to the building. Something was wrong. She wasn't sure how she knew. Particular quality of the silence outside the door. Maybe. The way the air in the warehouse of below had since sounded when they were crossing it. Some frequency she'd absorbed without consciously registering. Ronan, I hear it, he said, without looking up. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had a different quality of movement, now faster, tighter. We have a problem. 2 vehicles on the east approach, coming without lights. Cole, Ronan said. Moving too fast for negotiation. How long? 2 minutes. Maybe less. Ronan looked at the filing case. The lock. At Marcus. Open it now, whatever it takes. Marcus crossed the room in 4 steps, and Serafina moved back, and there was a sound she looked away from, and then the case was open, and Ronan was pulling files thick, organized, labeled in the specific meticulous way she'd identified as Cole's handwriting style from the loan documents. She grabbed half the stack without being asked. Started flipping, scanning. She didn't need to read every page. She needed to identify the key documents, the ones that formed the spine of the federal filing, the ones that without them the whole architecture fell. She found them in 40 seconds. 3 documents. Federal submission cover letter, witness cooperation agreement, the core asset documentation linking Ronan's properties to the pre-legitimization period. These 3, she said. Ronan looked, nodded. If these 3 disappear and Cole can't reconstruct them in time, the filing loses its foundation, she said. Cooperating witness, Dora, is already contained. Without these and without her testimony, the submission falls apart in preliminary review, he finished. Yes, a sound from below. Not subtle. Feet on concrete. Cole had arrived, and he was not being careful about it, which meant he knew they were inside, which meant he knew they were inside, which meant he had a way of knowing, which meant somewhere in the last 2 hours there had been a breach she hadn't anticipated. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds and landed on it, her father. Not deliberately, maybe. Cole monitoring the phone. Call she'd made to her mother's number to get confirmation. Simple and catastrophic in her mistake. No time, she pushed it down. We need another way out, she said. Ronan was already looking at the window at the far end of the room. It faced the dock side, the rear of the building, away from the east approach. He moved toward it. She followed. Below was a service platform, then dock access, then water. Car was on the opposite side of the building. Marcus said, Santos has the vehicle. I can redirect to the dock access in 4 minutes. We don't have 4 minutes, Ronan said. He looked at the window, at the distance, at Serafina. Can you manage that drop? She looked. 10 feet to the platform. Yes. You're sure? I'm sure. Stop asking me things you already know the answer to. Something quick moved through his expression, and then he had the window open, and Marcus went first because that was how this worked. And then it was Ronan's hand on her arm. Not hesitating, not questioning, just steadying there. And then she was through the window, and she dropped and landed hard on both feet. Felt it in her knees and up through her hips. Not clean, but not broken, and she was already moving, before her balance fully recovered. Ronan landed beside her. One hand touched the platform to break the fall. Then he was upright, and they were running. The dock access road was 50 meters along the building's rear face. Dark, the water smell much stronger here, the wood of the platform boards uneven under her feet. She ran and didn't look back, and heard Marcus somewhere behind her, and heard much farther back the sound of a door being opened on the second floor and someone's voice yelling something she didn't catch because she was concentrating on the dock access road and the corner of the building and the 50 meters becoming 40, becoming 30. A shot. Single, flat, nowhere near any of them warning or poor aim. She didn't know and didn't stop to assess. 20 meters. Headlights appeared at the far end of the dock road. Pulled up short. Ronan's arm came across in front of her like a bar. She stopped, breathing hard, and the headlights resolved into Santos's vehicle, coming from the correct direction. From the building's far side, and she exhaled something she hadn't realized she was holding. Car stopped. Back door opened before the tires fully settled. Eleanor was inside, wide-eyed and steady, and Serafina got in and Ronan came in after her, and Marcus took the front and Santos was already moving before the door closed. No one spoke for 30 seconds. The building disappeared behind them. The dock lights, the water, the 2 vehicles on the east approach, all of it receding, and Serafina sat, with the Fridas fleshed against her chest, and her heart doing something extremely loud that she was grateful nobody could hear. Her mother reached across in the dark of the car and put her hand over Serafina's. Said nothing. Just that. She didn't pull away. They were 4 blocks from the waterfront when Cole called. Ronan's phone. He looked at the screen, then at Serafina, and she watched him make the decision in real time and answered it and held the phone where she could hear. You found her. Cole's voice was different, tighter. The pleasantness completely gone now. Nothing underneath it but the machinery. Case. Yes, Ronan said. The filing has a backup submission, a secondary documentation held by a separate legal entity. You didn't know about that. A pause, And she heard something in it that was worse than anger. It was satisfaction. Specific satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a decade and believes he is still winning. I have been building this for 11 years, Ronan. Think I would stake everything on a single file in a lockbox? Serafina's jaw tightened. The secondary documentation requires Dora's corroboration, Ronan said. Without her testimony, it's circumstantial. Dora gave a recorded deposition 14 months ago, before you ever started watching me. Cole's voice was almost quiet now. Before you ever involved yourself in the Caraway situation. Before any of this. Her testimony is already embedded in the filings, sealed independent of anything that happens to her now. A pause. Serafina did good work tonight. She got her mother out. Respect that. But it changes nothing about where you stand by the end of this week. Car kept moving. Nobody in it made a sound. What do you want? Ronan said. His voice was very still. The deepest register of stillness she'd heard from him yet. The one that lived below composure, below control, below everything he'd built. I want what I've always wanted, Cole said. The end of everything you built. Not because of business. Not because of money. Because of what your organization did to my brother 14 years ago. A long pause. Or did you think the debt of violence only ran one direction? The line went dead. Serafina stared at the back of the front seat. His brother. Cole's brother. 14 years ago. Before Ronan's 3 men. Before everything she'd built her timeline around. Debt that predated everything she thought she understood. 2 men. Each carrying the body of a brother. Each building toward the same collision from different directions. She turned and looked at Ronan in the dark of the moving car. His face was absolutely still. His hands were flat on his knees again. She watched him sit, with the weight of what Cole had just said, the revelation that the man trying to destroy him had been moving from the same wound, the same loss, the same particular hell that Ronan had been moving from, and she watched it land on him, watched him absorb it the way she absorbed things. She felt something shift in the space between them that had been shifting incrementally for 2 weeks and was now moving with a purpose she couldn't deny. You didn't know, she said quietly. No, his brother. What happened 14 years ago? A conflict. Before I had the control over my organization that I developed later. He said it without looking away from her. Men made decisions I couldn't undo. I've spent years trying to operate differently because of those decisions. He paused. It doesn't justify what he's done. It doesn't make the 3 men I lost. I know, she said. I'm not asking for... I know, she said again, and held his gaze, and he stopped. Santos said from the front seat, we need to figure out the backup filing. If there's a second submission point, we need to know who's holding it. I know who's holding it, Serafina said. Everyone in the car looked at her. She thought about the call she'd received 3 days ago. The one she'd taken as routine family pressure, a call from her father's former attorney, the man who had handled Caraway business contracts for 15 years, calling to check in on her well-being in the new marriage. She had thought it was her father's doing. A temperature check. She thought about the attorney. She thought about the attorney's name. She thought about the shell company's registered agent. She thought about the specific typography of the legal letterhead she'd seen in Cole's files. It's my father's attorney, she said. Daniel Marsh. He's the secondary holding entity. He's had the documents for at least a year. She saw Ronan's eyes sharpen. He called me 3 days ago. I thought it was my father reaching through a proxy. It wasn't. It was Cole confirming I hadn't found the connection yet. Carr was silent. Daniel Marsh has a primary office on Whitfield Street and a secondary consultation office in the financial district, she continued. The secondary office is where he holds materials for clients who require discretion. He's used it for Caraway business for 20 years. She looked at Ronan. If we get those documents before the filing processes. When does preliminary review close? Ronan said. Marcus was already on his phone. Filing date plus 30 days. Filing was 3 weeks ago. That gives us 9 days, Serafina said. 9 days, Ronan confirmed. Marsh doesn't know I've identified him, she said. He thinks I'm a woman who married into a crisis she doesn't fully understand. He called me 3 days ago to assess exactly that. She paused. Can get to those documents. How, Santos said. Because I spent 20 years watching my father manage that attorney. I know how Daniel Marsh thinks. I know what he's afraid of, and what he wants, and what makes him feel secure. She said it without satisfaction, just the plain useful truth of having grown up inside a world she'd never chosen. I can go to him as a caraway, as the family member managing the transition. He won't question it. She paused. He'll be relieved. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. She could see everything he was weighing the risk. The exposure, the possibility that Marsh had already been warned, all of it moving through that precise and rapid mind. Cole will contact him, Ronan said. Cole just lost his primary documentation and his leverage point. He's going to be managing multiple situations simultaneously in the next few hours. That's a window, a narrow one. Yes, she met his eyes. I work well in narrow windows. A long moment. The city moved past the car windows, the port district giving way to commercial blocks, streetlights making regular intervals of pale light through the glass. Tomorrow morning, Ronan said. First appointment. She nodded. They drove the rest of the way in silence, her mother's hand still over hers. In the dark, the document still pressed to her chest. When they reached the house, Dora was not at the door. The absence of her, the absence of the woman who had been at that door for 9 years with absolute consistency, was a presence of its own, an empty shape that held the outline of everything the night had cost. Ronan stopped in the hallway and looked at the space where Dora usually stood. Serafina stood beside him and didn't say anything because some things didn't need saying, and she was learning which kind this was. He turned and walked toward his office, stopped in the doorway, spoke without turning around. Thank you for tonight. She looked at his back. At the set of his shoulders, the lines of exhaustion visible now that the operational focus had dissolved. At the man who had lost a brother and built an empire from the loss, and then watched the empire become the source of another man's identical wound. We're not done yet, she said. No. A pause. But you could have chosen differently. At any point tonight, you chose this. She understood what he was saying. Not about gratitude. Something more specific. The acknowledgement that she had made choices tonight that could not be explained by obligation or strategy or the terms of a contract. She had chosen them. Go sleep for 3 hours, she said. We have 9 days and they start tomorrow. He almost did the almost smile thing. She saw the edge of it before he went through the doorway. She stood in the hallway of the house that wasn't supposed to be her home, holding evidence that could save a man she wasn't supposed to care about. 2 weeks from a table in a dining room where her life had been put up as collateral, and she thought about narrow windows, about the specific quality of a man who asks you to come back out of a building, about the way fear that makes you functional is the most honest thing you can feel. She went to her room. She set the documents on the desk. She sat in the chair and looked out at the overgrown edges, the careful, imperfect thing that someone had tended without needing it to be perfect. She did not sleep for a long time, but when she did, it was the deepest sleep she'd had since arriving in this house. And when her alarm pulled her back at 6 in the morning, with the whole weight of 9 days pressing down, and Daniel Marsh's office opening at 8:30, and Cole somewhere in the city recalibrating everything, and the federal clock still running, she got up without hesitating, and she got dressed, and she went downstairs to find Ronan already at the table with coffee and documents, and the particular focused stillness of a man who had not wasted the 3 hours she'd told him to sleep on actually sleeping. You didn't sleep, she said. I thought of something, he said, about Marsh, about how Cole would have structured the secondary holding arrangement. He pushed a piece of paper across the table. Look at this. She sat down and looked at it and felt her mind engage immediately. Completely, and she picked up the coffee he'd already poured for her without being asked, and they worked. And outside the window the city began its morning in total ignorance of what was moving through it, and 9 days ticked toward 8, and somewhere across the city Garrett Cole, yes, was making phone calls with the tight voice of a man who had just discovered that the pieces were not where he'd left them, and the game that he had spent 11 years building was about to meet the one variable he had never accounted for, the woman he had dismissed as a bargaining chip, sitting at a table with a man she was not supposed to understand, neither of them willing to stop. Daniel Marsh opened his office door at 8:47 and found Serafina Caraway standing in his waiting room with a leather folder under her arm and the specific expression of a woman who had already decided how the conversation was going to end. He was 64, small-framed, with the groomed carefulness of a man whose entire professional identity was built on being trusted with things that couldn't be said out loud. He had handled caraway business for 2 decades. He had attended Serafina's university graduation at her father's invitation. He had sent a handwritten card when the marriage was announced. He had also, for the past 14 months, been holding sealed federal documentation in his secondary office on behalf of a man who had engineered the destruction of 2 families. She watched him register her presence, and she watched the micro-calculation happen behind his eyes. How much does she know? What does she want? How much danger am I in right now? And she gave him nothing to work with except a calm professional smile and the leather folder, which contained exactly what it looked like it contained: Caraway family documents requiring his review. Serafina. He recovered fast. She gave him credit for that. I didn't have an appointment scheduled, I know. I apologize for the short notice. She let the smile do its work. Practiced, warm, her mother's social architecture deployed for the first time in her own service. With everything that's happened with the family transition, there are documents that need your signature as retained counsel. I wanted to handle it quietly, without involving my father directly. You understand. He understood. He understood perfectly, and he relaxed by 3 degrees, because the sentence had given him exactly what he needed: a narrative that made sense, a reason for her presence that had nothing to do with the thing he was afraid of, and the implicit invitation to be trusted with a sensitive family matter. Men like Daniel Marsh lived for exactly that. Of course, he said. Come in. She was inside for 22 minutes. Ronan was parked 1 block east with Marcus, watching the building entrance. Santos was at the rear. The plan was simple in the way that only works when the person executing it is operating at complete precision with no margin for error, which was to say it was not simple at all, but it was the only thing available. She had gone in alone because she had to, because the moment Daniel Marsh saw an unfamiliar face, something in his calculation would shift, and the shift would cost them everything. She had gone in alone because she was, as she had told Ronan the night before, with complete factual accuracy, the only person in this situation who could do this particular thing. At the 9-minute mark, she was in his secondary consultation room, on the pretext of reviewing a document too sensitive for the reception area, and she had 40 seconds while Marsh stepped out to retrieve a file from his main office. She found Cole's sealed documentation in the 3rd drawer of a fireproof cabinet behind a set of client dividers labeled with a company name she recognized from the shell company registration. The envelope was thick, sealed with evidence tape, labeled with a federal case reference number she had memorized from the submission cover letter she'd recovered the night before. She replaced it with an identical envelope, same dimensions, same weight, achieved with 3 hours of preparation the night before, and a postal scale from Ronan's supply room, and she was back at the consultation table with her leather folder open and her hands completely still by the time Marsh returned with his file. She signed the documents she'd brought. He signed the ones that required his signature. They exchanged the appropriate professional pleasantries about the family's situation and her adjustment to married life and the general difficulty of transitions, and she stood and shook his hand and walked out of the building at 9:09. She got into the car. She held the envelope out to Ronan without speaking, took it, looked at her, said nothing for a moment. Clean? He asked. He has no idea. Marcus exhaled from the front seat. Santos's voice came through the radio. All clear rear. Ronan set the envelope on the seat between them and looked at it the way you look at something you've been moving toward for a long time, with a kind of exhausted recognition, feeling of arrival that doesn't feel the way you thought it would because you're too tired and the cost has been too high. This doesn't end it, he said. The filing is compromised without this, but Cole is still. I know, she said, but it changes our position. She looked at him. Now we make the call. The call was to a federal prosecutor named Anita Reyes, whom Serafina had identified through 3 degrees of professional connection from her unfinished law degree. Years a woman known for 2 things: absolute prosecutorial integrity and a specific and documented hostility toward cases built on compromised witness testimony and fabricated documentation chains. Serafina had spent 2 hours the previous night drafting the email. She had sent it at 4 in the morning with the documents she'd recovered from Cole's lockbox attached, and a 12-paragraph summary of the evidence trail she had built over the past 2 weeks: the shell company, the engineered debt, port contract access, the timeline of Cole's infiltration, the secondary filing documentation she now held physically in her hand. She had not mentioned Ronan's name once. She had identified the filing entirely as the product of a compromised witness Dora and a document chain built on fabricated asset dating. She had framed it as a matter of prosecutorial integrity, not as a defense of any organization. She had written it the way she imagined a woman who had nearly finished a law degree and had spent 20 years watching the gap between what things were and what they were presented as would write it precisely, without flourish, without mercy toward the parts that were ugly. Reyes had called back at 7:42 before Serafina left for Marcia's office. Call had been 11 minutes long. Serafina had answered every question directly and had said twice, clearly, that she was prepared to provide physical documentation if required. Now, sitting in the car outside Marcia's building with the secondary documentation in her hand, she called Reyes back. "I have the secondary holding documents," she said when Reyes answered. "And the cooperating witness testimony has been compromised by prior relationship to the filing party. I can demonstrate both." A pause. "How quickly can you initiate a review of the submission?" Reyes said, "If what you've sent me holds up to verification, I can have the submission flagged for integrity review within 48 hours. Flagged submission gets suspended pending investigation." Another pause. "Ms. Carraway, I need to ask you directly. Are you doing this on behalf of Ronan Voss?" Serafina looked at Ronan sitting beside her. He was watching her face, not the phone. "I'm doing this because a fabricated case is an offense against every legitimate prosecution that office has ever conducted," she said. "And because the man who built it murdered people and engineered the destruction of 2 families and deserves to face that accountability himself without using your office as his instrument." She paused. "What happens to Ronan Voss after this filing is reviewed is a separate matter that has nothing to do with the integrity of the case I'm bringing to your attention." A long moment on Rhea's end. "Bring me the physical documentation," she said. Today, Cole called Ronan at 11:15. Ronan answered on speaker. They were back at the house, at the dining room table, documents spread between them, and when Cole's number appeared on the screen, they looked at each other, and Ronan put the phone down flat and answered it. "Marsh called me," Cole said. His voice was different from the waterfront call, tighter, stripped of even the pretense of the pleasantness he'd worn for 7 years. "The secondary documents are gone." Ronan said nothing. "You sent her in," Cole said. "A woman with a leather folder and 20 years of watching her father manage that man." A pause. "I underestimated her. I won't pretend I didn't." Another pause. "It doesn't change the deposition. Dora's recorded testimony is all ready. Dora gave her deposition under your direction. After 14 months of coordinated coercion," Serafina said, and she watched Cole go silent on the other end. "She was your aunt. She was inside Ronan's house. You had access to everything about her life, her finances, her history, everything she needed, kept quiet. Whatever she told that prosecutor, she told it because you had made her position untenable. That's witness coercion. That's a criminal offense that invalidates the testimony and exposes you to additional federal charges." She kept her voice even. "I've already communicated this to Anita Reyes's office." The silence that came back was the longest yet. When Cole spoke again, something had changed in him. Not the machinery that was still running. She could feel it, but the outer layer, the performed confidence, the decade of patience, expressed as certainty, gone. "You can't prove coercion without Dora's cooperation," he said. "Dora spent this morning speaking with Marcus," Ronan said. His voice was very quiet. "For 3 hours. Another silence. "She has children," Ronan continued. "I've known that for 9 years. I know what you used against her." He paused. "I told her this morning that her children's situation would be handled regardless of what she decided to do, that there was nothing you could threaten her with that I wouldn't make irrelevant." He picked up his water glass and set it down. "She talked for 3 hours, Cole. She talked about everything. The line was very quiet. "It's over," Serafina said. Not with satisfaction, just the plain truth of it stated because it needed to be said out loud, and because Cole was the kind of man who needed to hear it from the person who had dismantled it rather than from a document. "The filing will be suspended by end of week. The coercion evidence goes to Reyes today, along with the physical documentation. The shell company trail, the port contract access, the engineered debt, all of it is documented and attributed." She paused. "You came for Ronan because of your brother. I understand that. I understand what that kind of loss does to a person's entire geometry." She meant it. "But you took 11 years of other people's lives to build your case, and you didn't care what you destroyed along the way, and that is what this ends on." Cole said nothing. "Turn yourself in," Ronan said. "To Reyes directly, not through intermediaries. If you run, I will find you." And the version of that conversation is considerably worse than what Reyes's office will offer you. He didn't say it with heat. He said it the way he said most things, as plain, undecorated fact. "You have until this evening." He ended the call. The dining room was very quiet. Serafina sat back in her chair and felt something leave her body, not relief, exactly. More like the specific dropping of a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten. It had a separate existence from her own. Her shoulders dropped by a fraction. Her hands unclenched from the table edge. Ronan was looking at the phone. "He won't turn himself in," he said. "No," she agreed. "He'll run." "Yes. And Reyes's office will find him, and your people will find him, and he'll have nowhere that isn't already accounted for." She looked at him. "It's not a clean ending. It's the real kind." He looked up from the phone. Something in his face the same stripping away she'd seen the night before. The removal of the operational layer was still there. He was tired. Actually tired. The kind that showed in the eyes and around the mouth. The kind that meant something had finally been allowed to stop running. "My brother's name was Eli," he said. She didn't move. Let it be there. He was 24. He'd been with me for 2 years. And I was younger than I am now. And I thought I had more control over the situation than I did. And I was wrong about that. He paused. He trusted me. That's the part that never went away. She looked at him across the table, across the spread of documents that represented 2 weeks of her entire life, reorganized around a truth she hadn't chosen. And she said, "You built something different after. Because of him, I tried to. I've watched you for 2 weeks, she said. "You did." He was quiet for a moment. Cole's brother was 22. "I didn't know his name until last night." He picked up a pen and set it down. A small, unnecessary movement she'd cataloged weeks ago. Marcus found it. His name was Peter. She absorbed that. 2 brothers. 2 men destroyed by the same machinery. Years apart, both of them gone, before they understood what was moving toward them. "None of this was worth it," she said quietly. "Either direction." "No," Ronan said. "It never is." They sat with that for a moment. Not uncomfortably. The way 2 people sit with a true thing when they've both stopped pretending it isn't true. Cole was found 4 days later. He had not run far, which surprised her until she thought about it, and then it didn't. A man who had spent 11 years in one operation, one long, patient plan, didn't have a contingency for the plan ending. He had been in a hotel 14 miles from the port district, which was either an inability to fully commit to flight or something closer to surrender wearing flight's clothing. Reyes's office handled the arrest. Marcus told her the details in the same tone he used for everything factual, brief, without embellishment. Cole had not resisted. He had been sitting in the hotel room with the curtains open when they came, which she thought about for a long time afterward. She thought about a man who spends 11 years in the dark and sits in a lit room at the end of it, visible, not hiding, and she understood something about what that meant, even if she couldn't say it precisely. Federal submission was suspended within 72 hours of Reyes receiving the physical documentation. The integrity review was opened. The coercion finding regarding Dora's testimony moved quickly through the preliminary process, because Serafina's documentation was, by every account she heard second-hand through Reyes's office, meticulous. Dora left the house the day after her 3-hour conversation with Marcus. She left a note on the kitchen table, which Ronan read and did not share. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket, and Serafina did not ask about it. Whatever was in it was between Ronan and 9 years of something that had turned out to be other than what it appeared. And that was his to carry. The house felt different without her, quieter in the wrong places. Serafina started making coffee in the morning herself, learned the machine through trial and error over 3 days, and by the 4th morning had it right. Her father called 2 weeks after Cole's arrest. She let it ring the first time. The second time she answered. He had been informed by his attorney, a different one, not Marsh, who was navigating his own professional consequences, that his cooperation with Cole had been fully documented, and that the question of his criminal exposure was being assessed. Called not to manage the situation. He called because there was nothing left to manage, and he sounded, for the first time in her memory, like a man without a performance to give. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "When you were 17, when the business first started failing." He paused, long enough that she thought the connection had dropped. "I knew it was bad. I knew I was making choices that weren't recoverable, and I chose to keep going instead of stopping, because stopping meant admitting it, and I couldn't." He stopped again. "I couldn't be that in front of you. You were always the one who saw things clearly. You saw me clearly. I couldn't be the man you saw when you looked at me." She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden and felt something that was not forgiveness and not absolution and not any of the things that words like that are supposed to name. Something more like the plain recognition of a broken thing being acknowledged as broken, which was different from being fixed but was also the only real starting point for anything that came after. "I know," she said. "That's not enough. What I did. No, it's not enough." She let that be there, didn't soften it. "But I understand what you just said. And that's something." She paused. "Don't call me for a while. I need time." "How long?" "I don't know yet." She was honest because she had decided to be done with the other kind. "I'll tell you when I know." She ended the call and stood at the window for a long time. The garden was less overgrown than it had been a month ago. Someone had been tending the edges. She hadn't asked who. She suspected she knew. The contract was on the dining table when she came downstairs on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after the night at the logistics building. She recognized it immediately. The original document, her copy, the one she'd kept in the top drawer of her desk, because she was the kind of person who kept things in case she needed them later. A habit born from a childhood of things not being what they were presented as. Ronan had found it, or had known it was there, and had placed it on the table. He was standing by the window, not looking at it, looking out at the garden in the last light of the evening, hands in his pockets, posture she had learned like a language over 6 weeks, the specific arrangement of his body, when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about. Liked him out for long enough that the thinking was finished and only the saying remained. Came to the table, looked at the contract. He turned from the window and reached into his jacket pocket and produced a lighter. Old metal, the kind that had been used enough to develop the worn finish of a thing with actual history. He set it on the table beside the contract and looked at her. "I want to be clear about what this is," he said. "It's not a gesture. It's not a negotiation." He paused. "I'm not offering you freedom because I think it's what you want to hear. I'm offering it because you chose to be in this, all of it, and that choice was never covered by anything in that document. And I don't want a document that was written in a dining room by a man trying to solve a problem be the thing that describes what you are in this house." She looked at the lighter, at the contract, at him. "What am I in this house?" she said. "Someone who chose it," he said, repeatedly. "Under pressure that most people wouldn't survive." He held her gaze. "That's not something I can put in a contract, and I don't want to try." She picked up the contract, felt the weight of it not heavy, just paper, just words. But she had spent 6 weeks understanding that the weight of things was never in the material. Picked up the lighter, held both. "If I walk out of this house tonight," she said, "what happens to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "The operation is secure. Federal issue is resolved. The organization continues." He paused. "Continue. That's not what I asked." Something moved in his face. Thing she'd been watching for 6 weeks. The thing that almost smiled and almost reached and almost arrived, and then pulled back at the last moment. She watched it almost happen again, and she watched him, for the first time, not pull it back. "You know what happens," he said quietly. She did know. She had known for some time. She had been refusing to call it what it was, because naming it meant accepting that she had traveled from a dining room table and a contract and a man she called a monster all the way to this kitchen window and this garden and this worn metal. Lighter in her hand, and the distance between those 2 points was the distance of everything she had become in the process. She set the contract on the table. She set the lighter down beside it. She looked at him for a moment, at the gray eyes that had once seemed colorless, and now seemed like the color that remains when everything else has been burned honest, at the scar below his ear, the hands in his pockets that had reached toward her a dozen times, and stopped themselves, at the face of a man who had spent years building walls, and had watched her walk through every single one of them without appearing to try. "I'm not leaving," she said. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it the way he absorbed things completely, without reaction on the surface, but something underneath shifting, settling, the way a structure settles when the final load-bearing piece finds its position. "I want to be clear about something too," she said. "I'm not staying because of what you did in that hotel room when Cole was arrested. I'm not staying because of the contract, or because of my family, or because of anything that existed before I made the choice myself." She paused. "I'm staying because you knocked on my door. Every time. You waited. You told me the truth, even when it was worse than the lie. And when I walked into a building in the middle of the night on behalf of my mother and your name, you told me to come back out." She looked at him steadily. "That's not nothing. That's not a small amount of something." He came toward her from the window, not fast. Nothing about him was fast except his mind, and stopped directly in front of her. The same close distance as that first morning in his office, when she'd said his name, for the first time, and the room had changed shape slightly. His hand came up slowly, and he did not stop it this time. He touched her face the way a man touches something he has been afraid to want carefully, like he was still checking whether it was real, whether it would change if he made contact with it. She leaned into it, just slightly, just the small honest movement of a woman who was done performing steadiness she didn't feel. "I don't know how to do this," he said. Quiet, the quietest she'd ever heard him. "Neither do I," she said. "We have that in common." He almost laughed. The almost was the closest it had come yet. She heard it in his exhale. She filed it away. She reached past him and picked up the lighter and the contract, and she walked to the kitchen, and she burned it over the sink, the paper catching clean and burning fast. And she ran the water over the ash. And when she came back to the dining room, he was still standing where she'd left him, watching her. Put the lighter on the table between them. "Keep that," she said. "It has good history." He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up and put it back in his jacket pocket, and she thought about Eli, about Peter, about 2 brothers and 2 men and 11 years of wreckage, about her father's voice on a phone, saying things that were too late and still necessary, about Eleanor's hand in the dark of a moving car, about the specific smell of a garden that someone tended without needing it to be perfect. She thought about a woman who had stood at the top of a staircase, counting her breaths and watching men walk into her house, and had decided in that moment of forced stillness to see clearly rather than to look away. That woman had not known what she was starting. She was glad she hadn't. If she had known, she might have been too afraid to begin. The months that followed were not easy. She had never expected them to be. The federal proceeding against Cole moved through its stages over 4 months slowly, with the weight of a system that was thorough when it worked correctly, and in this case, because of Reyes, and because of the documentation Serafina had provided, it worked correctly. Cole's charges included witness coercion, fabrication of federal evidence, conspiracy, and multiple counts related to the deaths of Ronan's men 14 years prior charges, built not from Cole's own constructed case, but from the evidence trail Serafina and Ronan had assembled together. Daniel Marsh negotiated a cooperation agreement that cost him his license and kept him out of prison, which was exactly the kind of unsatisfying outcome that actual legal systems produced, and she made her peace with unsatisfying because the alternative was demanding perfection from a process that had never promised it. Father's exposure was assessed. Her father's resulted in a fine and a suspended sentence, and the permanent dissolution of the Caraway business name, which was both less than she'd feared and more than he'd expected. She did not attend his sentencing. She sent Camille, who reported back in the specific Camille way direct, without editorializing, and Serafina accepted the report and thought about it for several days, and then put it in the category of things she would continue thinking about for a long time, without resolution, which was the most honest category available. Her mother came for dinner twice a month. Eleanor and Ronan developed a relationship that Serafina watched, with something between amusement and profound relief, a wary mutual respect built on the shared recognition that they were both people who had significant difficulty without becoming smaller in the process. Eleanor brought flowers from her own garden. Ronan always had the right wine. They argued occasionally about things that didn't matter, and agreed about the things that did. Camille came when she wanted to, which was often, and she and Marcus developed a dynamic that Serafina chose not to examine too closely. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, 7 months after a rainy night on the steps of the Valenti estate, Serafina sat at the desk in what had stopped being the guest room and had simply become her room. Then their room, the desk still hers because she needed her own space, and Ronan understood that without being asked. And she finished the document she'd been writing for 3 weeks. It was a legal brief, a real one, submitted to a firm that Reyes had recommended, a firm that handled cases involving financial crimes and institutional coercion, kind of cases that required someone who understood both how money moved and how people moved money when they were afraid. It was the first professional document she'd submitted under her own name in 11 years. She saved it and closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the specific morning quiet of the house, which was different from the silence of those first weeks. Fuller, the kind of quiet that has something warm at the center of it. Ronan appeared in the doorway with coffee. She had not heard him on the stairs, which was still something she was working on accepting as a permanent feature of life with a man who moved like that. He set the coffee on the edge of the desk and looked at the closed laptop. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. He had read it twice while she was writing it, had asked 3 questions and made 2 suggestions, both of which she had incorporated because they were correct. And when she told him they were correct, he had said nothing, and she had seen the almost thing, and this time it actually arrived, small and real and completely unguarded. She had put it somewhere inside her where the things that mattered lived. Picked up the coffee, looked out the window. The garden below had been properly tended over the last month. The edges brought in, the overgrowth addressed. Still wasn't perfect. There were places where the wildness was too established to be fully reclaimed, and had been left because removing it entirely would have taken out root structures that the healthier parts needed. She had done some of the tending herself on weekend mornings, wearing old clothes and working without gloves because she thought better when she could feel what she was working with. Ronan had come out twice and worked beside her without being asked, and they had not talked much during it. And the not talking had been the most comfortable silence she'd found since the day she counted to 340 at the top of a staircase and tried to prepare herself for the rest of her life. She had not been prepared. Nobody ever was. But she had been clear-eyed. She had looked directly at the things she needed to see. She had not looked away. The man in the doorway, the man who had entered her family home on a rainy night with a contract and a reputation and a grief he'd carried. For so long it had become the architecture of everything he built that man was not a legend anymore. He was not the story the city told. He was just a man standing in a doorway, in the morning light with his hands in his pockets and a patience that had taken her 6 months to understand. Was not distance, had never been distance, had always been the specific carefulness of someone who had learned that reaching too fast for things you needed meant losing them. She understood it because she had learned the same thing, in the same school, through the same long curriculum of watching people you trusted make choices that cost you years. They had both paid for the education. Neither of them had gotten a refund. They had kept what they learned. "Come look at the garden," she said. He came and stood beside her at the window, and they looked at it together, the two of them, in the morning, in the house that had become something neither the contract, nor the debt, nor any of the architecture of that rainy night had ever intended it to become. Outside, the city moved and did not know them, which was exactly right, which was exactly as it should be. Inside, It was quiet in the way that means something is whole.